welcome to another edition of the Sight and Insight podcast. My name's Judy Curtis, and with me today we have the very lovely Lorwyn Connie Nagel and the equally lovely David P. Curtis. So we've been trying to persuade them to go outdoors to paint. The weather's been a bit changeable, but in fact we decided instead that we would do a podcast and we would look at the work of Don Stone. Don Stone, there's a show on at the North Shore Arts Association, even as we speak. It goes through, she says, hastily checking her notes, it's on view through October 9th at the North Shore Arts Association, 11 Pirates Lane, Gloucester. And I've been working on Don Stone for a little while now. I helped do a catalogue for the show that was at the Rockport Art Association shortly after Don passed away. And now there's a new exhibition of his work at the North Shore. It's a wonderful exhibition, and it shows up really well in the main gallery at the North Shore upstairs. So if you hadn't take the time to go over and look at it, you won't be disappointed. I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation on September 30th. I think that's a Sunday at 2 o'clock. So if we whet your appetite with this podcast, I hope you'll come along and join us on that day and take a look at the work. So actually I'm really cheating because I'm hopefully going to get a lot of information from David and Connie about Don's work. I mean, I have some ideas about what I wanted to talk about. I think he's a wonderful designer. I love his brushwork. I think his sense of composition is wonderful. But I'd really like to hear what the actual artists feel like. I'm looking at it as the point of view of a viewer. But Connie, can I start with you? Because I know you studied with artist Stan Moller. And Stan was a pupil of Don Stone's at some point. So do you have any thoughts on what you learnt from Stan that might have been handed down? It's like this golden thread of art education.
Right. It's true. Stan Muller speaks of Don Stone as being his mentor, his primary teacher. And he accumulated a lot of things. He even worked a lot with videos, which Don Stone apparently did, and he would use that to compose things that were moving, like oceans and stuff like that. Yeah. So I saw that he kind of mimicked Don Stone in that way, but he also, I think, had this kind of spontaneous, strongly emphasized brush stroking that they do, that both of them do, that seem rather sketchy and like in the moment.
That's
and
right.
I love that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's important because if you're going to be painting something, that's what you want. If you don't want a painting to look laboured over. And
right,
so
exactly.
If you're outdoors enjoying your painting or in the studio, you want to be in that moment, as you say, and you want the work to look like was really easy to do, even if it wasn't. You want the viewer to see that sort of representation.
And also, I mean, I say it's sketchy, it's spontaneous, but the color notes are fantastic, very rich, deep, and I believe that that's really the entrance into Don Stone's paintings to me. Right now, I can really feel the color notes, and it gives me something. Yeah. You know, so it's more than his drawing, is what I would say.
Yeah, because when I look at Don's work, it doesn't necessarily doesn't have an architectural look like he's trying to draw everything in. It's more a case of being able to put the brushstroke down to. Is he representing form with colour and brushwork? Is that what you're supposed to do, David?
We're supposed to. Yeah, we're supposed to do that. But that's not always easy, and
hit upon the
doesn't always come together. But only the artists, only the artists seem to recognize themselves that their own work has these pitfalls in it. Yeah. In thinking about this, I believe you was hired by a gallery to do a biography on Don Stone.
My first chance of meeting Don Stone, and I was absolutely petrified.
Judy was scared, so she asked me if I'd go along. And
I'd
I
heard
said,
lots of stories about him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and most artists tell fantastically wild stories about each other.
It was greatly
and
exaggerated.
none of them are
he
true.
was such a gentleman. But I did take David with me for
So I
for
went along
security.
and walked into his beautiful home in New Hampshire, and had a beautiful studio. I mean, the studio was a home unto itself, and there was all his paintings hanging in the studio with frames on them, and I just assumed they were finished paintings. And he looked. I said, "These are all finished, Don?" He says, "No, no." And he went over to one of the paintings, took it out of the frame, and put it on the easel. And he says, "I think I know what's wrong with this painting." I said, "Well, how many years have you been working on that?" "I don't know. This is about 6 or 7 years old, and I think I know what the problem is. I can solve it." And I says, "Well, have you shown it?" He says, "Oh yeah, it's been out. Came back." And I think
that
I've
makes
got
me
the problem.
feel good. Because I'm doing this
No,
all
you're
the time.
in good company.
And so when I asked him, because most of the time, if I'm with fellow artists, Connie, you're one of the few people likes to talk about painting and how to paint. Most painters don't. They'll talk about everything under the sun. So I think it was because Judy was there, and his ego wasn't needed to come out. He said to me, the whole philosophy of art was, it's a puzzle to be solved. And I thought,
believe that.
I could see that exactly. And whatever the puzzle was, and it's that mental, I don't want to call it agitation, but it's that mental preoccupation painters have with their own work and with painting in general, that I think it becomes a problem to be solved.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting as, like I say, I didn't know what to expect, so I asked David to go with me. Of course, I needed him to drive because I have no sense of direction, and we had to go up to Exeter, New Hampshire, I think it was. But it was really interesting hearing Don talk, and I was glad David was there because I think as the artist in Don Stone was talking to the artist David, and therefore it was something different to talking to somebody who's going to be writing about you. But it was an honour to do that, and then a little later, Don and his wife Sarah approached me to do some more writing for them, and then I helped Caleb Stone and his sister Pam, the family, put something together. After Don passed away, we put sort of like a memorial catalogue together, and when you see a body of Don's work in one room, like either the Rockport Hibbard Gallery or the North Shore, because that's a beautiful gallery too. When you look and you see all those paintings, I mean, there are over 100 paintings in this show at the North Shore. And there are big ones, small ones, some are sketchier than others. But it's just the whole, you see the whole gamut of that work, and you look, and there's a lot of variety. Sometimes when you see a one-man show, everything is so samey that your eyes sort of slide round and it doesn't stop anywhere. And with Don Stone's work, you find yourself stopping at every painting to look at them.
Yes, they're all different.
Right.
And I just think they're amazing. And I'm
didn't his style? I mean, I knew him better in the '80s than in the '60s, '70s when he was around Gloucester. I didn't know him well then. And I believe his work in those days was a little different.
Yeah, I think
it was mostly watercolors.
It went through several different permeations. I mean, his background was that he was actually doing, he was doing art at Gloucester High School. I think he studied with your Uncle Howard. And then after high school, he went to, was it Vesper George?
Yes. It's
I wrote
George.
it, and
Vesper George.
I remember everything.
He was very influenced by the teachers at Vesper George, who were professional painters.
Yeah, but he was also going into illustration.
That's right.
I think at the time, because obviously illustration was something that perhaps might guarantee a regular wage, as opposed to fine art, where yes, when you finally sell a painting, then you get the remuneration then. So he was studying illustration. He was in the Navy for a short time, and then when he came out of there, I think he was married and he got a job at one of the newspapers doing illustration. And so that was his background before he started moving into the fine art. Now, when he moved up to, I think the newspaper finished, and so that he was out of a job, and he came up to Rockport, and he met his next door neighbour. He met a neighbour who happened to be Paul Strizik, and he got interested in what Paul was doing because he'd never seen, Paul would say, okay, you're a painter, let's go out and paint. And Paul was used to painting plein air, going outdoors and painting, and Don had never seen anything like this before. He thought this was amazing. And so he would go out with Paul and paint, and it was Paul Strizik, I believe, who introduced Don to painting on Monhegan, which had a huge influence on Don because he finished up living there and teaching. And so it played a huge part in his career.
On Monhegan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he came up to me. I was painting a couple of Adirondack chairs in front of the Monhegan Library.
Mm-hmm.
And he comes up in this go-kart, parks it, and he says, "Hi, I like what you're doing."
Very nice.
Which was really neat.
It is, because I don't think he threw the compliments out just
because I never,
Because, yes, this was one of the stories I'd heard about how students would end up in tears and things like that. But I know, actually, from some of David's classes that students can end up in tears even if you say, yes, your work is good. So
that's right.
Artists, particularly student artists, can be very emotional about their work. It's very intense, the creativity that you pour into, you pour your heart and soul into something. Yeah, so anyway, I think it's...
So watercolors, when he met Strizik, was the main thing. Did he get introduced to oils when Paul was...
I thought he was doing oils with Paul.
As well as, I thought he had dabbled in oils.
Yeah.
But watercolor was his most noted medium, watercolor.
I thought he got into oils first. Because I thought it was... that he was doing oils, and then he wanted to get away from doing oils because he felt that people were comparing Paul's work and his own, and he wanted to do his own thing. So he started, I thought that's when he got into oil painting, watercolour painting. I'm sorry, folks, I haven't had enough coffee today. So that he was, and his idea of learning a new medium, because he went into egg tempera at another point, he tried many different things, was that he would look for an artist that he could admire and look at their work, and then he would work on it, copying the masters kind of thing. He would copy the work over and over to see how that artist had executed the work, the brush strokes, the composition, the colour tones. And he would do that constantly until he felt that he was comfortable with that kind of medium, and then he would sort of do his own compositions. And because he was telling me during an interview that although he would do all these copies, he didn't sell those copies. They were copies for his own personal use to learn how another artist had done something, and then he would come back to doing his own thing. And he did some really nice things. I wasn't going to talk too much about the watercolors in the PowerPoint, simply because when I was photographing the work for the PowerPoint, of course, it's hard to photograph a watercolor. So that's why I've got one or two watercolors, because I think some of them are interesting. And I'll be talking about a lot of the paintings that are actually in the show, so do go along and see them. They're a wonderful selection. There's also one or two that I was looking for that were either from the previous exhibition at Rockport or from other galleries that have shown his work, because I think a lot of these paintings just show a very unusual sense of what he would do for a design or a composition. I was just trying to find one. Because at the moment we're just looking at some of the pieces that are for the PowerPoint, because I was cheating. I wanted to know what the artist thought about this work, and I'm just trying to find one that I put in. It's it was a watercolour that was done inside a barn, and it just struck me as very unusual. So I'm just going to click through all these things. You see, folks, we have a wonderful setup here. We've got computers all over, and then we've got microphones. You wouldn't believe the high technology that we're dealing with. Oh, here it is. And I thought this was a really interesting piece, and it's of course now I can't find all the titles.
Of course, we were all we're looking at a piece now of a roof of a barn.
It's up in the rafters.
With
Your
the
birds,
window coming
swallows
through.
in the rafters, or something like that.
This is the type of work. When I was a young man growing up, we admired Andrew Wyeth so much because he was somebody in the news, somebody who's been accepted by contemporary people. And yet he was doing very traditional type work. And they had a deep emotional feeling, even though some of them might have been a little too black and white, as if the color was something distasteful to him. I never met Andrew Wyeth, so I don't know, but I think that he influenced a lot of people. I think his son, Jamie, influenced me when I was in high school, and to see his progress as a painter and what he was doing as a painter. So I thought that he influenced Don as well as many other painters in this generation of the 50s, 60s into the 70s. And it brought a whole, I think Andrew Wyeth solidified the concept of that it wasn't wrong to think traditionally, and it wasn't wrong to think about things that we recognize and see. I think he did go into those ideas of like this particular piece of a barn with just the ribs of the barn in it, and a window with light coming through the window. Something as very simple as this, and it's seen sideways as if you would see it. Well, that reminds me of that sort of thinking outside the box a little bit, so that I'm going to do a tree, but I'm not going to do a tree the way Monet did it. I'm not going to do a tree the way this Baldini painted it, or anybody else. I'm going to see the tree totally different, a new angle on how to paint a tree. I think that was what was going on because who wants to look at another painting of a landscape with bright colors and everything else? So I think Wyeth was very apropos.
Don't you think it's really lonely?
Yes, it has a deep feeling to it. Yeah.
Of this Don Stone piece that we're looking at.
Because I wasn't brought up over here, of course, I'm not. I know the name of Andrew Wyeth, but to be honest, I wouldn't recognise a lot of his work. So when I look at Don's work, to me, it's very, very personal as to how he wants to show things.
Yes, and it was, and I'm not saying. I'm saying that. Andrew Wyeth influenced that whole generation of painters in many different ways. And like I said, I was more attached to Jamie, his son, who was more adventurous with color. And I loved color than maybe his father.
Like that's a tonalist.
Yeah,
it is a little on the tonalist side, but nonetheless, it's the subject matter that I think made us respond to Wyeth and woke us up a little bit as to what you could paint.
All right.
Rather than, in other words, in this case, it's a basket of pears.
Yeah, this one we moved on to, it looks like a basket of pears in a window.
Right.
But to me, the way he's framed that, you have part of the window frame in there, and it's not.
So the question is, are you looking out a window at a basket of pears on the outside ledge, or is that the reflection of the trees in the window?
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I just think he poses that question.
Because you can also see the mullion.
Right, mullions, yes, and there's a shadow across the basket.
So it means,
So you're outside looking in, and that must be the reflection of the trees. We also got into a little discussion, Connie and I, about brush strokes, and the looseness of the brush strokes was part of the lost and found in these paintings, I think.
So I think he's just able to, there is a lot of nice brushwork in those. Here we have one called The Last Flight, and it shows a big headlands covered in what looks
Right.
like snow. I think this is probably Monhegan, and of course Monhegan influenced a huge amount of Don's work simply because this is what he was painting, the coastline at all times of the year, and Monhegan has more cliffs, than it looks more like rockier cliffs, and around here you're going to get sand dunes and flatter, Bass Rocks is not a high cliff like I'm used to in Wales or Cornwall, something like that.
I think that Monhegan is a desirable spot because it has everything.
Yeah.
It has the cliffs. It has these, like, what they call cathedral forested place, and then it has these beaches and, lobster coves. And, I mean, it's just amazing.
It is, yeah. So I think this is why Don was attracted to it. He would go up there with Paul, and then eventually he moved up there. And I believe he was friendly with Philip Shoemaker, who was a marine artist. And so there were a number of things that attracted him there. And of course, he got very friendly with a lot of the fishermen who would, take him out on the lobster boats. But as you mentioned, Connie, he built up a large video library of seeing the ocean in movement, particularly in storms. And this was something he commented to me about was, when the seas are that heavy, you can't stand there and paint them.
Yeah. Exactly.
But so you have to go and you have to watch what they're doing, try and remember it, and it was the advent of the movie camera.
Yeah.
And I know David's dad Roger would there'd be a hurricane coming in, the heavy seas, and he'd take the boys out to go on the back shore to have a look. Nowadays, the police won't let you out there if there's any bad weather. No, they close the road.
Police are aware of stupid people doing stupid things. So.
But back then, of course, they'd go out there and David's father would stand there and just look at the ocean. And obviously, he was trying to memorise how it would look so that then he could come back home and do these beautiful seascapes. In Don's case, he was taking advantage of all this modern technology of the movie camera so that he could sit in the comfort of his home or the studio and watch these over and over to get the idea of the anatomy of a wave and the colour. And so it was something that I thought was interesting.
Actually, it's extraordinary because he's studying it.
Yeah,
and he's getting it in detail. And just to use, I think about it, some people discourage photographs and all that.
Yeah.
But he was studying something that would then allow him to spontaneously put that into the painting.
Yeah, well, I suppose moving water is probably easier to look at and be influenced by perhaps than just a flat photograph, a still photograph of a wave breaking or something like that.
Right.
But then I've never had to paint it like that, so I could be wrong. So
I think it's...
I think it's a great idea. I mean, why not take full advantage of any technology you have today to help you to remember something that's a momentary moment in time. And I think Don was wonderful at this. We're looking at now a wonderful piece of three fishermen just doing their work on board a boat, concentrating. They're all embedded in their own thinking. Wonderful design, wonderful feeling of what's in focus, what's out of focus, what's important, what's not important. Beautifully done. And is this illustrative or is it fine art? Well, I think in America's history, if Winslow Homer's considered an illustrator, he certainly broke out of those barriers of illustration being lesser than fine art. And I think
it is somewhat illustrative, don't you think?
A little bit.
A little bit, but he takes it beyond illustration.
I think Americans...
It's design.
Yeah, it is.
Design.
I think his design, the number of pieces I've seen where he's got people who are moving out of the the painting. It's very Degas-like. You don't have to have everything in the painting because just, this is what's in the frame, but you know that just because you can't see the legs of these people, you know they've got them.
Yeah, right.
He's trying to get the swell and the movement of the boat.
I just think it's
I think he does
a good job at
that. Over a quarter of the painting is just taken up with the sail. But he balances that with with everything else. That's
Yeah,
in
he's
the
got well, he's
painting.
got the angle of the figures at one angle, the sail at another angle, and the horizon line at another. And I think that's accurate. I mean, I think that's pretty difficult
Yeah.
things to do. And I think he's just making a statement about what modern life is going on. It's not much difference from this life of a fisherman than it was in 1930. Except obviously they would know maybe a storm was coming or not coming.
Yeah, he's depicting a time.
Yeah.
You know.
And the interesting thing is, because we know Don went from, if it's oils and watercolor, then he goes into gouache. Do you have gouaches in the show?
It's I'm not sure if it's
Is the
quite-
figure
this-
walking through the field this one?
This
is this
one
a gouache?
is called Bittersweet.
Not
No,
gouache.
it's egg tempera.
Egg tempera, that's
Yeah.
what I meant, sorry.
And I think it's probably the only piece in the show that's not for sale. I think this has always
Right.
been a favourite to the family.
Right.
And it just depicts a girl walking through this field. I think it's very striking.
Very Maine.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've heard people say that this is very sort of Andrew Wyethly. But
Well, I mean, like I
and
said, I think
I don't
is.
have that.
I think there were so many
comparison.
painters that were influenced by this, and I don't
Right.
think I don't think there's anything wrong with being influenced by
No.
a painter like Andrew Wyeth and the stature that he had. I think also too it changed our ideas about composition.
Yeah.
That there was nothing wrong with telling a story.
Yeah.
And that's very illustrative,
It is, yeah. I mean,
in
the
nature
model,
to tell stories.
yeah, the model has her
Right.
back to us. It's not something where you have to see the figure, the full face
Right.
or anything like that. She's doing her own thing. She's
Right.
walking in, but I just think the texture that she gets in this meadow, I think is
I
beautiful.
know, I love that.
And you could say
Yeah.
that these paintings were of a new era, and I don't think there's anything wrong. I think at the time we might have said, "Oh, they're just copying so and so, or they're just copying Groupie, or they're just copying Kurt." It doesn't make any difference in the end when you start seeing and looking back, because it's a part of time. And if it's a big movement, and I think that was a big movement in the 60s, sort of like back to nature movement. The hippies wanted to
Right.
build a cabin in the woods and live there the rest of their lives, grow their own food.
You thought this was similar to that?
Well, I thought it was similar in the sense that craftsmanship was important to them.
Right.
It wasn't just the idea of building a house in the woods and make your own, stand up and make your own vegetable garden and things like that. The craftsmanship of everything right around the time of the 60s started meaning more. I saw a line of kids studying with my teacher. Nobody wanted to study with them. It was me and two others, and nobody else was even trying to get into the school. By 1972, there was a line so long of people who wanted to figure out, how do you do this? How do you make an oil painting? So I think all that craft of painting became rekindled in the 60s, and through Andrew Wyeth and through the Wyeth family. I think was very major player. And then other people just played off of it, interpreted, because eventually Don leaves egg tempera, I think, and goes back to oils
Yeah.
To oil.
with a different
Right.
style.
Yeah, it is. You can look at his work, and as I say, when you see a whole body of it together, you really see how talented he was to be able to do so many different mediums, so many different subjects. I really think he was underrated at times
Yes.
because people were so busy thinking, well,
Amazing.
it's like Wyeth, it's like Strizik. In actual fact, it was like Don Stone, and he did some beautiful work. Can't believe we've come to almost the end of the half hour there. So, any last thoughts from you,
Well, I
Connie?
just want to remind everybody on the 30th of September, there will be a great day at the North Shore. Judy will be doing a PowerPoint. The day before, we three with a brush, Connie, Lowen, Connie Nagel,
Tommy.
Tawny Heinsohn, and myself, David Curtis, are all showing together at Connie's house in Kittery Point. And, I think if you request an invitation, we'll be happy to send it to you.
And if you want any further information on that, why don't you check out the latest edition of the American Art Review. It features an article on Don Stone Comes Home with some beautiful illustrations and some very erudite information from myself with all the details and the facts that I forgot today. And there's also an ad in there about the Three with a Brush show. So if you need further information, either check out the website or check out the American Art Review. So we hope you've enjoyed this. We hope you'll join us for another episode next week. And in the meantime, don't forget, hit that follow button and you won't miss another episode. Very important, because we know how much you enjoy listening to we three getting around the microphone here and fumbling our way through another 30 minutes. But it's interesting. Art is something very special that we should enjoy. And for me, I get so much information out of listening to David and Connie talking about the actual creating of an oil painting or a plein air painting or whatever you're doing. It's something so necessary today, and we should all have a go at it. And if we can't paint ourselves, we should go out there and buy one. So don't forget to check us out next week. And in the meantime, have a great week. Thanks for listening.